This is the Tougher Minds podcast. In this episode, we're talking about the importance of sleep. I'm Andrew Whitelam. I'm joined by Dr. Jon Finn, Tougher Minds founder. Jon, what's your big picture take on the importance of sleep in people's lives and in their work?
Well, first and foremost, good quality sleep is essential for being healthy, happy, and at your best. That's because it helps the brain to work properly. And in particular, an area of the brain called the hippocampus or the hippocampi, because there's one in each hemisphere. And big picture-wise, if your hippocampi are not working properly, it becomes more difficult for your brain to produce new brain cells. And new brain cells are absolutely essential if we want to get good at managing stress, and also if we want to be good at learning new things, which we need to do in this very challenging world that we live in. And the challenge with securing really good sleep is that big business don't really care if you get a good night's sleep or not. They're more interested in you consuming the media that they put out, whether it's on a streaming service like Netflix or on the internet or on your phone. So it feels more challenging than ever to get really, really good quality sleep. And connected to that is that we're all the time understanding more about the importance of it and why we need to do it really well.
And what are some of those potential consequences of poor sleep in people's lives and in their work?
Well, if we start with the world that we live in, which we know we live in a challenging world, and we sometimes describe that world, or the world we live in, as the VUCA world. VUCA stands for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous.
That's a term that's, I understand, coined first by the US military to describe the post-Cold War situation, but now applied in business.
Yeah, so it's been adopted pretty widely in the business world. And really the crux of that is that the only constant in the world that we live in is change. And that is because of technology. Technology is evolving faster than we've ever seen before via things like artificial intelligence and machine learning. And we're seeing that if businesses don't keep adapting and changing, they get left behind very quickly. You know, the shelf life of a top performing business now is about 15 years, unless they keep innovating and developing. Some of the biggest companies in the world at the moment didn't exist 15 or so years ago, including the likes of Amazon and Facebook and Uber and companies like that. So we live in a world where there's this change going on. If we're going to keep up with the change, we need to learn, we need to adapt. If your brain isn't working properly, and your brain won't work properly if you're not sleeping properly, that's going to limit your ability to learn well. So to learn new skills at work, for example. So in the factory model of work, we used to, once we'd learned the job that we were going to do, we then did a very similar job for the next maybe 40 or 50 years. It's not the same anymore.
And we could repeat that without too much more thinking about it, is what you're saying?
Yeah, so it became a habit and we learned what we needed to do. Now we're being asked to change. So there's a big shift at the moment from having a dedicated desk where you turn up for work, you've got your dedicated desk, to now having open planned offices with hot desking, where organisations are asking their employees not to even come to work so regularly anymore. We've got introduction of new technology all the time into the workplace, so we're moving into agile workplaces where the way that we're working is changing. So if we want to get good at learning those new skills, then sleep is absolutely essential. And if we're not sleeping well, it will hinder our ability to do that. Connected to this is we need people to be able to innovate and be creative and to keep refining and adapting what they're doing to make it even more efficient and effective and more aligned with what customers want and need.
And that's certainly an attribute that's seen as desirable and important in business, isn't it? And often very highly prized.
Yes. And again, if your workforce are not sleeping properly, they're not going to be able to do that as well as they could. And part of that connects to failing fast, which is a term we often hear about in the world of work. And that connects to the lean model of learning. So, not we've got to keep refining our ideas, getting them out there, getting the feedback, and getting to the position, getting the products to the position we want to get them to delight our customer as quickly as possible. So again, if we're not sleeping properly, it's going to limit our ability to learn from our mistakes. And then also connected to the area of learning is if we want to not just learn new functional tasks like how to use a new operating system, but if we want to learn new personal performance skills, personal well-being skills, like, for example, we want to build a new stress management habit, then again, if we're not sleeping properly, it's going to limit our ability to learn that. So that's the learning element.
So it's this environment then that's challenging for us now, the environment we find ourselves in, and the need to be able to perform as a person and as a professional, if you like, in that environment then, to summarise, you'd say.
Yeah, so learning is absolutely essential if we want to do well in a world where the only constant is change, because we have to keep adapting to that change in order to help ourselves to be healthy, happy and at our best.
This is the Tougher Minds podcast. Thanks very much indeed for listening. We hope the insights that we share and are going to share are helpful for you in your life and work. We very much appreciate you giving us a moment of your time to listen to this episode. Jon, talk to us more then about what are the potential pinch points, if you like, when someone is trying to sleep well for all the right reasons you just outlined in their lives. They might have a busy job, they might have a busy family. How can that affect their quality of sleep?
Well, in lots of different ways. We live in a world where, more people than ever before are reporting that they don't feel very well, and I would suggest that's connected to this constant need to change and adapt to changes. And as we've said, that leads to, if we're not sleeping well, at least a poorer function of brain. And that means, as well as being more difficult to learn, it's also going to be more difficult to deal with stress and deal with all these little, what we call disconnections that lead to stress that happen every single day. And the stress is simply caused because what you expected to happen didn't happen. It could be as simple as you held the door open for someone and you expected them to say thank you when they didn't. That might be a little disconnection. Or someone got a little bit too close to you on the tube this morning. That might be a little disconnection. Or the email from your boss this morning didn't say what you thought it would say. But it's going to be more difficult for our brain to recover from these disconnections. One of the reasons is that the brain will be producing fewer new brain cells, and that when we've got lots of new brain cells, it makes it easier to think flexibly around difficult problems, to put perspective on things and to step back. If we don't have lots of new brain cells, we find ourselves getting sucked into these negative thinking ruts, and it gets harder to get out of them. We just get sucked in, and all we can pay attention to is the unhelpful thing. As well as this, what we're starting to understand with reduced sleep and poorer quality sleep is we get this thing called reduced functional connectivity happening in our prefrontal cortex. Our prefrontal cortex is the part of the brain that is responsible for helping you to feel calm, to be rational, to be reasoned. So when this part of the brain isn't working properly, we are going to say more negative things to ourselves. We are going to do more things instinctively and do more things that we regret. We're going to be more forgetful. And I hear lots of people reporting to me that when they've been through periods of stresses, that their memory wasn't working as well. And that leads to more stress. People talk about, I couldn't think straight because your prefrontal cortex isn't working properly. So, the consequence of not sleeping well, and I'd say if there's one thing that anyone should prioritise every single day is preparing to have a really good night's sleep tonight. The consequence, if we're not doing that, is that our life just gets more difficult, and actually it gets more difficult to secure the good night's sleep, so we get in a negative cycle.
We're going to talk later very much in much greater detail about how to do that, how to secure that good night's sleep you've talked about, and some of the excellent tips that you have for that. I also want to talk to you more about this idea of using willpower and judgment, if you like, and how that's damaged by sleep, as you've just alluded to. And also, what I want to ask you about in a few moments is this idea that what you're saying then is that there's an actual physical, chemical change or changes happening in the brain when we don't sleep properly. There is an actual physical consequence within the human body, which perhaps people don't quite understand. They maybe associate it with some sort of feeling, and they don't attribute that feeling to actual physical changes. So I'm going to ask you about that in a moment, but we want to say to everyone, send us your questions. If you have any specific questions for Dr. Jon Finn, we'll answer them. We'll do our very best to answer them on the Tougher Minds podcast. Just email them to us, contact@tougherminds.co.uk. contact@tougherminds.co.uk. Please email in your questions. So John, if you would just summarise for us then, the I think you would describe it as a neurobiological consequence for poor sleep in the brain, chemicals changing, things like that happening.
Yeah, so sleep has two core functions. One is you organise everything you've been paying attention to that day. It's almost your librarian in your brain, if you want to think about it like that, filing things away. And it's getting rid of some stuff that are becoming less relevant because you're not thinking about stuff anymore, so your brain starts to get rid of it via a process called pruning. And then the stuff that you've been paying attention to, your brain strengthens its connections around those areas. If you're sleeping well, if you're not, that doesn't happen. And
you talk about it in terms of like almost a little army inside your head doing it, but you're actually saying these are chemical processes.
Yeah, so our brain is a living thing. And we learn via a process called neuroplasticity. That's the way our brain changes. And that word just means the neurons in your brain, of which are about 100 billion, are like plastic, but think more like plasticine. They're reshapeable, remoldable. We didn't really understand that until we got this technology called functional MRI scanners that allowed us to see inside the brain for the first time in real time. And it shows that our brains are changing all the time. But if we're not sleeping properly, our ability to learn is compromised. And we can see this very clearly from compelling sets of data, whether it's in sport or in academic studies. Those people who are sleeping the best, they learn better, they'll learn faster. And you increasingly see professional sports teams building almost hotels on their training grounds. So their athletes, they can have an afternoon siesta because they get the recovery and the learning benefits of that. So that's one part of sleep. The second part of sleep is that we allow our brain to clear out all the nasty toxins that are gathering during the day.
Literally chemical toxins.
Yeah, and what we're starting to see, we know that if you didn't sleep very well last night, this idea of reduced functional connectivity and the prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain that is doing the rationalising and the reasoning and connecting your mind to the outside world, it doesn't work properly. So you get that if you're tired, it's harder to concentrate, it's harder to focus, it's harder to be clever, it's harder to retrieve. But there's a longer term impact as well. And what we're seeing is that big sets of compelling data showing that poor sleep habits, they are being connected to prefrontal cortex diseases like Alzheimer's. To the point where a recent edition of the New Scientist front cover was why lack of sleep is killing your brain.
Wow.
Because we're not allowing, if we're not sleeping properly, we're not allowing the brain to clear out all the nasty chemicals that are building up during the day. And that goes on and on and on. And ultimately your brain can't recover. So if we're not sleeping well, our brain is not going to be able to clear out all the nasty chemicals that build up in it during the day, which has both short-term and long-term consequences.
So, it's quite sobering for people to learn. They might think they just feel bad for a particular week or have a bit of a poor day in the office, but you're saying there could be long-term health consequences for poor sleep in your lives. I'm sure that's something people will be very much mindful of. This is the Tougher Minds podcast. Please rate and review us on Apple or wherever you get your podcasts from. We're a regular series, hopefully with plenty of insight that you can apply in your life and your work. So please do rate and review us on your podcast platform of choice when you have the opportunity. Thank you very much for that. John, you talked about the idea that this has an impact on people and hence has an impact on business and organisations. And often, quite rightly, businesses are keen to understand these things in an empirical way. They try to really understand how this might impact them more broadly. And I understand the consultancy McKinsey carried out some research into the effects of sleep on businesses and organisations.
Yeah, they've created a report called The Organisational Cost of Insufficient Sleep, and it was particularly focused at business leaders. And it found actually 46% of those leaders that were in the study believed that lack of sleep had little impact on their leadership performance. But paradoxically, 83% of those same leaders believed that their organisations didn't spend enough time educating their people about sleep and the importance of it. And this brings us back to the impaired judgments that happen when we're not sleeping properly. And to understand that, you've got to think, well, how do we make a judgment about anything? And obviously, this is a process that happens in milliseconds. You know, when you meet someone new, you are judging them in milliseconds. And that means that two parts of your brain are working in sync together. Your prefrontal cortex and the limbic regions. Your prefrontal cortex is taking in the new information from the environment and it's connecting that with what's already stored in your brain from past experience in the limbic regions. Now, if your PFC isn't working properly via this process of reduced functional connectivity, you're not going to be able to make good judgments and decisions because there's not going to be a good flow between these two very important parts of the brain. So if we've got an organisation where people are not sleeping properly, they will be making poor decisions and that will be costing your business money.
So, and in the same way, we just talked about a management consultancy. Of course, they would their watchword, I suppose, is objective decision making and analysis. Any person wanting to perform well and be their best and manage well in a business of any size or organisation, they'll want to exercise good judgment. So, is there an analogy with high performing sports people who prepare their bodies? People in business and industry should think about preparing their brain with sleep.
Exactly. And one very interesting insight I've seen recently was that the technology company Slack, which is a British startup that moved out to the Silicon Valley, and they're an equivalent to email, a cleaner kind of email channel, which makes it easier for people to communicate. Not plugging or endorsing Slack, but just trying to explain what it is if you don't know what it is. It's a very big company. They are absolutely prioritising good quality sleep in their people. They trigger this everywhere in the organisation, you know, from how they are expecting their people not to be engaging in work communications after a certain point in time, to how the signage around the offices continually triggered. So clever, high-performing businesses are really getting onto this. But what I would say is one thing, knowing that you need to have good quality sleep. There's another thing, being able to do it, because we live in a world where it's becoming more and more difficult to secure really good quality sleep. So we need to have ultimately some skills that allow us to build new sleep habits.
This is the Tougher Minds podcast. If you want more resources and some useful downloads which can help you build new habits around sleep and give you some insights into performing well in your life and your work, go to tougherminds.co.uk. Tougherminds.co.uk is the website. You'll find a lot of different options and opportunities to download some resources on that website's homepage. That's tougherminds.co.uk. This is the Tougher Minds podcast. Thanks for listening to us. We do appreciate it. John, we've talked then about the importance of sleep, the consequences of poor sleep, how it can have these very profound negative consequences for businesses and organizations. I guess the final element then has got to be, how do we go about improving and securing good sleep so we feel well and we perform well?
Yeah, so the first step that we need to take if we're going to improve sleep quality is by doing something that we call self-watching. This sounds a little bit creepy, watching ourselves, but it does what it says on the tin. It's literally about being more aware, not just doing what you always did. Turns out that most of what we're doing and thinking is a habit. And we understand that at least 98% of what we're doing right now is a habit. If you go onto our website, tougherminds.co.uk, scroll down the homepage, you can see a link that explains all about how your brain works, and it will give you some more insight there. But because most of what we're doing is a habit, we're not always that self-aware. So to change what we're doing and to build new habits, we need to do self-watching. And an example of how we might self-watch our sleep would be to think about our sleep last night and give ourselves a score out of 10. So a 10 would be the best quality, the best night's sleep that you could have. And your score is whatever it was. So I might say, well, last night my sleep was about an 8 out of 10. And when I'm making that judgment, I'm thinking about not just the quantity of sleep, how many hours, also the quality of sleep. You've got to factor those two things in. Often, the messaging we hear about good sleep is how long. And the thing that we need to bear in mind when we hear that messaging is that scientists are always looking for average is. And we know that the ideal length of sleep actually changes as we get older. So as we get older, we actually need less sleep. But what we need to work out for ourselves is, okay, let's look at what the science says. And for adults, the scientists would say we need somewhere between 7.5 to 8 hours sleep per night.
Is that an average for most people, would you say?
Yeah, but what we need to bear in mind is that we're not average. We are who we are.
Yeah.
And our life is as it is. And so we need to work out, well, what does it look like for me? What does a really good night's sleep look like for me? And you can do a little bit of personal research on that. And my experience would be different times of the year. That's going to change slightly. You know, when that workload is really up, you're going to need more sleep, which feels counterintuitive because I have less time, but actually it'll take you longer to get that work done if you're not sleeping properly. So you've got to work out, what does a 10 look like for you? And then give yourself that ranking. And that's the first part. So you've got to self-watch. And if you're really serious about building a new sleep habit, you've got to do that every single day.
For a week, say? Or
try it for a week, but if you want to do it well, you will soon notice that when you stop self-watching, it becomes more difficult to do. Once you've worked out what your score is, we then move on to what we call the aim. So I've recognised, okay, well, last night my sleep was an 8 out of 10. I'd like to improve that tonight. So I want to set myself an aim, an improvement aim. So I might say, well, I want to get to a 10 out of 10. But in reality, that's too big a jump. It's too big a goal to work towards. So we need to make our aims really small. So a good aim for me would be to get from an 8 to an 8.5. That might mean I'm aiming for an extra 10 minutes sleep tonight than I got last night. We often can become very helpless when we're trying to change behaviours like sleep. We imagine that, well, I'll never be able to get any better sleep because I'm just a poor sleeper. We've got to reframe that conversation with ourselves. And we talk about the P2 continuum to help people to think about it. So P2 is poor to perfect. And it isn't that you're a great sleeper or you're a rubbish sleeper, you are somewhere on that continuum.
Might be just an average sleeper.
You might be somewhere in the middle, you might be closer to the poor end or closer to the perfect end. But in reality, you're probably not at the absolute extreme of either end. So you might think of poor is 0, perfect is 10. And all we can do is recognise where we currently are and think about what's the next little step that I can make forwards. And I would think about it as, can I get 1 more minute's sleep tonight than I got last night? And you might think, John, you're crazy. What's the point in doing that? The point is that you start to build some positive change momentum. You start to show yourself that actually, if you willfully work towards having a better night's sleep, you will make some progress. Sure, you're not going to get an absolutely perfect night's sleep, but you will improve. And the more you practice that, the better you will get at it. So we set ourselves a nice little aim.
Achievable, manageable.
Yeah, but I'd go further. It's tiny. Make it tiny.
Yeah.
When it's difficult to make a change, make the change smaller. Because we're not going to achieve all our dreams tomorrow. That's in the distant future. What we can do by tomorrow is make a small step in the right direction. That's all we're trying to do. So the easier you make it to do, the more likely it is you will do it. And you start to build your confidence that you can make a positive change here. So we call this the habit factor. Keep the change really small. So we self-watch, we recognise, well, here I am, I'm an 8 out of 10, or you might be a 5 out of 10, you might be a 2 out of 10, you might be a 1 out of 10, wherever you are, you've got to think, what's the next little step forwards? And it could be an extra minute, an extra 10 minutes, an extra 15 minutes, whatever you think is doable for you. But unfortunately, just self-watching and making an aim is not going to be of any use unless we make a plan. Because an aim or a goal without a plan is just a wish. It won't happen. So we say, okay, well, tonight I want to get an extra 10 minutes sleep. But what's the plan that's going to get me there? And your ability to sleep well tonight has been influenced since you got up this morning. When we hear about interventions about getting a better night's sleep, they often start with the hour before we go to bed. But in reality, everything you do today will impact on how well you sleep tonight, or how poorly you sleep tonight. So you've got to have some tools, some insights that you can use to actually help you to plan for a better night's sleep. So there are some kind of obvious things in when we talk about these insights, these tactics, if you like. But remember, it's not about knowing they're good ideas. It's about implementing them regularly. So the first thing I always say to people, if they're trying to improve sleep, the first important thing to pay attention to is what time you got up this morning. And it might sound really obvious, but lots of people at the weekend, especially on a Sunday, they fall into the trap of wanting to have a lie-in, but then wanting to get an early night. And you can't do both. Good sleep quality is about consistency. So we've got to be aware of that. If you want to be going to bed nice and early on a Sunday night, what time you get up on a Sunday morning will impact that. And of course, then people find they couldn't sleep well on a Sunday, and that just throws everything out for the week.
And it kind of compounds itself through the week, presumably, then.
Yeah, and it
can do.
It fuels the helpless story that I can't change something. Next thing I'd discuss with people is the importance of exercise. If you're struggling to sleep, you need to be doing more exercise. And when we say exercise, it isn't about necessarily going to the gym. Walking counts, just accumulating more steps. I travel around the world a lot and delivering our Tougher Minds programs and doing consultancy work, and jet lag becomes a factor. But I know that if I'm jet lagged and I increase my exercise, it helps me to sleep. So I do that. So you've got to bear that in mind. Caffeine is a factor. Caffeine is a stimulant. keeps you awake, and it doesn't just come from hot drinks like coffee and tea. It comes from soft drinks, not just things like Red Bull, but also things like Coca-Cola and things like that. So we have to be aware, do we want to be putting this stimulant into our body so close to before we're trying to actually relax and calm down and get into this nice sleepy state? Personally, I don't drink, I drink less caffeine than I ever have before. Probably have only 3 caffeinated drinks per day now. And I don't drink caffeine after 4 p.m. anymore. So I want to be falling asleep personally by 9:30, 10 o'clock. And I found that's really helpful for me. So something to pay attention to. How much alcohol you drink and when you drink it impacts on sleep quality. Although it might help you to get to sleep faster, it seems to stop us getting into those good quality, high quality restorative sleeps. So we don't wake up in the morning feeling refreshed because it stopped us getting into what we call the non-REM cycles, where all the sleep magic really happens.
When you say restorative, you mean that chemical renewal that you talked about earlier in the podcast?
Yeah, so the
in the brain.
The brain's equivalent of the lymphatic system. We don't think the brain has a lymphatic system. So when the brain shuts down and kind of clears itself out, that's not happening. So alcohol will make it more difficult to get high quality sleep, even though some people I think are using it as a sleep aid. It's actually getting in the way. Connected to exercise and alcohol and caffeine is hydration. If you are dehydrated before you go to sleep, then it's going to be more difficult to do it well. And caffeine, alcohol, and exercise will dehydrate you. So you need to be aware of that. And so personally, again, I probably drink more water throughout the day than I ever have. I've kind of a 2-litre bottle that I'm working through. And I see the difference, And also, we live in a world where we can eat more processed foods than ever before. Often they're really salty. And again, I would see the difference if I eat the wrong kind of stuff in the day. So you've got to be aware of hydration. There's some interesting science that shows that sour cherry juice, drinking sour cherry juice for adults can enhance sleep quality. That's about melatonin. And melatonin is our brain's sleepy neurotransmitter. So it's the neurotransmitter that tells our brain it's time to rewind, to unwind and relax now and ultimately get into a sleep state. We can get melatonin supplementation from the doctors, but like most supplements, we understand that our body's not very good at absorbing them. According to studies, there's naturally occurring melatonin in sour cherries.
Sour cherries are interesting, yeah.
So,
and there's some brands on the market, not that we're endorsing any particular one, but that you can, if you do some research online, the sour cherry juice, I'm sure, will be there to have a look at.
Yeah, it's something interesting to pay attention to. Nothing that we ever say at Tougher Minds is prescriptive. We never say you must do these things. We're just trying to give insight, and that's something that's interesting. I think that study shows that adults who drank 2 glasses of sour cherry juice per day achieved an extra 34 minutes of sleep per night, which is not bad, is it? But some things will work for you, some things they're not going to work for you. Another substance that I use, a legal substance for sleep, and I've only started to do this quite recently, is valerian supplement, which is it's a herb, and it's been anciently understood, I think, dating back to the Greeks, that it's a sleep aid, and sometimes people use it for anxiety as well. And I found that helpful personally.
And that's available at health food shops, that kind of thing, is it?
Yeah. So I would buy that just from the supermarket.
Okay, yeah.
And it's labelled sometimes as a sleep aid.
Yeah.
We also know that what you eat before you go to bed impacts on sleep quality. So we should be avoiding eating large, heavy meals. But there's some science showing that particularly carbohydrate and protein snacks combined, that they increase possibly the release of melatonin. So maybe a ham sandwich or something like that. And something that I would use, again, if I'm jet lagged and maybe I'm waking up in the middle of the night, I might just use that, get something inside me to get my body back onto that sort of sleep pathway, if you like, just to reduce everything and unwind.
But only a small amount, presumably.
Only a small amount,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So just literally a couple of slices of bread and maybe something in it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's about putting things inside our body. Also, we now live in a world of what's called the attention economy, where everyone's trying to get your attention because they monetize that. So, things like, do you check your email before you go to bed? And is that a good idea for you? I don't know, I'll let you answer that. Some people would find that very stressful. We know that looking into our handheld technology, like our laptop and our tablets and our smartphones, the light that's coming from those devices is telling your brain not to release any melatonin. And that obviously makes it more difficult to go to sleep. So we should be turning that technology off at least an hour before we go to bed.
1 hour?
It's up to an hour before you go to bed.
Right, yeah.
And also think about, can I readily reach out and grab that technology if I'm waking up in the middle of the night? And am I looking into that light, shining a light in my eyes, basically at 3 o'clock in the morning, and then thinking it's really hard for me to get back to sleep? Well, guess what? You just told your brain not to go to sleep, to stop reducing melatonin, and it's time to get up now. So is that a good idea? I've long since got that technology out of my bedroom. You can buy a traditional alarm clock, £1 from the market. So that, and also on the messaging of lighting, we now live in modern homes where we can have bright lights on all the way in the evening, but that's think about the signal that's given to your brain. You want to be messaging to the brain, no, it's getting time to go to sleep now, so let's turn down the lights. Get the right kind of lighting in your bedroom, the adjustable lamps that just emit enough light for you to be able to read the book, that kind of thing. Other things, room temperature. Again, we started to understand that actually we fall asleep as our body temperature reduces. So if you have a hot bath and you start to feel sleepy when you get out of the bath, it's because your body temperature starts to reduce. If our bedrooms are too hot, it's going to be really difficult to allow our body temperatures to reduce. And think of, again, modern homes, central heating, etc. You've got to be really mindful of that, especially if we live in a country a bit like the UK where we get these often extreme temperature fluctuations. It can be freezing 1 minute and then quite mild the next, but we've got the same set central heating on. So that's something to pay attention to. One of the things that I did this summer actually is that I bought a new mattress, one of these mattresses that are marketed as being really helpful for sleep. And I found that it has been really helpful for sleep. I already slept pretty well based on applying all these ideas, but that's been really helpful. So thinking about what you sleep on, etc., and do you need to make maybe an investment which will pay you back again and again. Other ideas, do you have a get back to sleep routine?
If you wake up in the middle of the night?
If you wake up in the middle of the night. If you don't, you've got a stay awake routine. There's a rediscovered understanding, seems to become quite popular in the last 12 months, that we used to have 2 sleeps per night. So in Victorian times where they would go to sleep and then it would be quite normal to get up again in the middle of the night, do something and then have another sleep. So there seems to be this natural tendency that we do wake up in the middle of the night. We can't really avoid that. It's about then how well you're able to get back to sleep again. And for me, if I can just secure an extra 10 minutes sleep, I'm happy than if I would just, stayed awake. And I've got a get back to sleep routine.
And what is that routine?
Well, it starts with not being able to see a clock if I wake up, including in the hotel rooms. I'll be covering all the clocks up. Because it stresses me out if I see, it's 3 o'clock in the morning. Oh no.
I'm up in 2 hours.
Here we go again, yeah. A lot of preparation work. So I've been preparing for a good night's sleep since I got up this morning. The first thing I do is I go for a run. I'm staying hydrated throughout the day. I'm not drinking caffeine after a certain time. I'm taking that valerian tablet before I go to sleep. But then maybe I need to go to the bathroom, so I try to get to the bathroom without turning any lights on if that's possible. I'm not going to check my phone. I don't want to be shining a light into my eyes. So my first default would be just to get back into bed and try to, maybe I'm too hot, so, hang a leg out of the duvet or whatever people do to cool down. But if that's not working again, what I would do is I'd get up, maybe have some water, maybe try some of a little snack. I might just do something to relax my brain, maybe stick on a podcast or even watch TV from a safe distance, not to get the light too much in my eyes, but just try to get my body back into get back to sleep again. I might have
or read a book, perhaps. A book, not a device, as I say.
Read a book, have maybe another valerian tablet. I'm not sure, you have to check how many of those you can have. I'm not endorsing you have loads, but now and again that's what I would do. But, getting a good night's sleep is the most important thing you can do in any one 24-hour period. But it's not easy. It's hard work, like everything that's worthwhile. And the final thing that's connected to that get back to sleep routine, but also the overarching idea of getting a good night's sleep, is that think about your bedroom as a place that is designed to prioritise sleep. It should be quiet, calm, dark, not full of technology. It should be clean. So you might need to just declutter your space. Get rid of the TV. You don't want to be in bed watching TV. It will reduce your sleep quality. Simple and practical things you can do by changing your environment will make it easier for you to get a really good night's sleep. And if I was trying to move my sleep from wherever it is at the moment, I said mine was an 8, up to an 8.5, I'd be using some of those tactics that we just went through to formulate a plan. And I tried to think of 3 distinct tactics that I was going to use. So I might say, well, I'm going to stop drinking caffeine I'm going to stop drinking any caffeine by 4 p.m. today. If I want to be asleep by 10, I'm going to make sure that I'm in bed by 9:30 reading my book. And I'm going to make sure, therefore, that I've turned all my technology off by 8:30. So
and that's your plan.
That's the plan. So we self-watch, we make an aim, and we make a plan. And in combination, we call that the swap cycle.
Well, those are some absolutely fantastic, practical, readily applicable tips to improve your sleep. And that's been a fantastic conclusion to this Tougher Minds podcast. You've been listening to the Tougher Minds podcast. We think it's a great idea if you share this with your friends, and perhaps you could even find a friend, a colleague, or perhaps your partner to discuss these ideas with, and maybe work together to make a plan for each of you, a personalised plan to improve your sleep. It might be more effective for you that way. Thanks very much for listening to the Tougher Minds podcast. Keep listening out for more episodes which will have insights to help you in your life and work. And we'll be back very soon. Thanks for listening.